"I want to give birth to a white baby," said the Apache woman at the lone rancher's door. The ranch sat far away from the main road, surrounded by open land that stretched until the horizon. Dust moved slowly with the wind, and the sky was painted in deep orange and purple as the sun began to set. This place had been home to the rancher for many years. He lived alone, not because he disliked people, but because silence had become easier than loss. His days followed the same pattern: early mornings, long hours of work, and quiet evenings that ended with the stars above him. The rancher was a man shaped by hard work and patience. His hands were rough, his movements calm and steady. He spoke little, even to himself. The land had taught him discipline, and loneliness had taught him restraint. He had learned to expect nothing from the world. That way, disappointment could never surprise him. That evening felt no different from the others. He had finished feeding the animals and was closing the barn when he noticed the light changing faster than usual. The wind grew still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He wiped sweat from his forehead and turned toward the house, already thinking about a simple meal and sleep. Then he heard it, a knock. It was not loud, but it was firm, not the sound of someone unsure or lost. The rancher stopped walking. No one came out here at this hour. The nearest town was miles away, and strangers avoided this land. For a moment he thought he imagined it. Then came the knock again, slow, steady, real. His body tensed. Years of isolation made unexpected moments feel dangerous. He walked toward the door, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. He did not reach for anything to defend himself, but his senses sharpened. When he opened the door, the evening light spilled inside, and there she stood. She was an Apache woman, standing straight despite the clear signs of exhaustion. Dust clung to her clothes. Her hair was pulled back, but loose strands framed a face marked by long travel and deep worry. Her eyes were dark and focused, holding something that made the rancher pause. It was not fear. It was determination mixed with desperation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved again, brushing past them like a witness to something important. The rancher noticed her hands were shaking slightly, though her voice, when she finally spoke, did not. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her words were simple, but her tone carried weight. The rancher studied her carefully. He had learned to read the land, animals, and people with equal caution. She did not look like someone asking for directions or help with a broken car. She looked like someone who had already made a difficult decision before ever reaching his door. Before he could respond, she said the words that would stay with him long after the sun disappeared. "I want to give birth to a white baby." The rancher felt as if the air had been pulled from his lungs. He did not react immediately. His face remained still, but his mind raced. The statement shocked him, not because of anger, but because it came with no explanation. It sounded heavy, dangerous, and deeply personal. He had no idea what she meant or why she chose him to say it to. He looked at her again, searching her expression for mockery or misunderstanding. There was none. Her eyes did not wander. She held his gaze as if daring him to turn away. "I don't think you understand what you're saying," he finally replied, keeping his voice calm. "I understand," she said quietly. "I understand more than you think." The rancher stepped back slightly, opening the door wider. He did not invite her in, but he did not shut the door either. Years of isolation had not erased his sense of humanity. He knew when someone was standing on the edge of something serious. "You should explain," he said. She nodded once as if she expected that response. But instead of speaking right away, she looked around the land, the wide fields, the animals, the fading light. Something about this place seemed to steady her. "My name doesn't matter right now," she said. "What matters is that I have nowhere else to go." The rancher felt a familiar discomfort. Trouble had a way of finding people who wanted nothing to do with it. He had built this life to stay far from conflict. Still, he listened. She told him she had walked for hours to reach the ranch. Her voice was controlled, but every word carried exhaustion. She spoke of pressure, judgment, and a community that no longer felt like home. She did not speak badly of her people, but she made it clear that her choices had left her alone. "I came here because you are outside," she said. "Outside the towns, outside the rules, outside the eyes that watch." The rancher frowned slightly. He did not like being described that way. He had chosen isolation, not escape. "What you said at the door," he began carefully, "that's not something people say without meaning." "I didn't say it lightly," she replied, "and I didn't say it because of hate or shame." That surprised him. He had expected many explanations, but not that one. "Then why say it at all?" he asked. She took a slow breath. "Because it's the only way you would listen." The words settled between them. The rancher realized she had calculated this moment. She knew the shock would force him to pay attention. That thought unsettled him more than the words themselves. The sky darkened further and the temperature dropped. He noticed she was cold. "You can stand inside while you talk," he said at last. She hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. The house smelled of wood and earth. It was simple, clean, and quiet. She looked around, not with curiosity but with respect, as if she understood the effort it took to maintain such a place alone. They sat at opposite ends of the table. The rancher poured water and slid the glass toward her. She accepted it with a nod. "I'm not asking you for anything tonight," she said. "I'm asking you to listen." The rancher leaned back in his chair. Listening was something he could do. It did not require promises. She spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. She spoke about fear, not the kind that fades, but the kind that grows. Fear of being trapped by expectations. Fear of a future where choices are made for you. Fear of bringing a child into a world where that child would inherit pain instead of opportunity. The rancher said nothing. He did not interrupt. He had learned that silence often made people speak more honestly. As she talked, he realized her earlier words were not about color or difference in the way he first assumed. They were about escape, about protection, about changing the direction of a life before it was too late. That did not make the situation simple, but it made it human. "You think I'm wrong," she said finally. "I think I don't know enough to judge," he answered. She studied him again, and this time her eyes softened slightly. "That's why I came," she said. Outside, the stars began to appear. The rancher knew that whatever this encounter was, it was not a coincidence. He also knew his quiet life had just been interrupted in a way it might never recover from. And as the night deepened, both of them understood that this knock at the door was only the beginning of something neither of them could yet fully see. The night grew quiet after she finished speaking. The rancher did not rush to answer. He had learned long ago that some stories needed space to breathe. The woman sat with her hands wrapped around the glass of water, staring into it as if the truth might appear at the bottom. The lamp above them cast a soft yellow light, turning the simple room into a place that felt smaller, safer, and heavier all at once. After a long pause, the rancher spoke. "You said fear," he said slowly. "Fear of what exactly?" She looked up, surprised that he asked so calmly. Most people reacted with judgment or confusion. His voice held neither. She took a deep breath, then nodded. "Fear of being erased," she said. "Fear of being told my life is already decided." She began to speak more openly now, her words flowing with less effort. She explained that she grew up surrounded by strong traditions, stories, and rules that had been passed down for generations. These traditions gave her identity and pride, but they also came with expectations that left little room for choice. From a young age, she was told what kind of life she would live, who she would become, and what her future would look like. "When I was younger, I accepted it," she said. "I thought obedience meant strength." The rancher listened carefully. He had lived by rules too, rules of survival, discipline, and routine. But his were chosen. Hers were given. She told him about relationships that were decided for her, about voices that spoke louder than her own, and about how questioning anything was seen as betrayal. She did not describe cruelty in dramatic words. Instead, she described quiet pressure, constant reminders, and the slow loss of her own voice. "It's not one big moment," she said. "It's many small ones. You wake up one day and realize you no longer recognize yourself." The rancher nodded slightly. He understood that kind of loss. After his family passed away years ago, he had felt something similar, not from pressure, but from grief. Life had narrowed until only work remained. She went on to explain that when she became pregnant, her fear deepened. Instead of joy, she felt trapped by the future others were already planning for her child. A future shaped by the same rules, the same silence, the same lack of choice. "I want my child to have options," she said. "I want them to grow up without carrying my fear." The rancher leaned forward slightly. "And you think leaving is the only way?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I tried staying. I tried changing things quietly. It didn't work." Her voice shook for the first time, not with weakness but with exhaustion. "I was told to be grateful," she continued. "Grateful for protection, grateful for guidance, but gratitude became a cage." The rancher let out a slow breath. He had heard many people speak about freedom, but rarely with such quiet honesty. There was no anger in her voice, only sorrow and determination. "You chose me because I live alone," he said. "Because I'm not part of anything," she nodded. "You are seen as neutral, untouched." He almost laughed at that. Untouched was not a word he would use for himself. Loss had touched him deeply. Loneliness had shaped every corner of his life. "I didn't come to take anything from you," she said quickly, sensing his discomfort. "I came because I needed someone who would see me as a person, not a symbol." The rancher stood and walked to the window. Outside, the land stretched endlessly under the stars. This place had given him peace, but it had also kept him disconnected from the struggles of others. He realized now that distance did not mean immunity. "People will talk," he said quietly, "if they find out you're here." "I know," she replied. "They already are." He turned to face her. "Then why risk more trouble?" She met his gaze. "Because staying would cost me everything." Silence filled the room again. The rancher returned to his seat. He noticed how carefully she held herself, as if ready to stand and leave at the first sign of rejection. "You said earlier that your words were meant to make me listen," he said. "They did." She looked down. "I'm sorry if they hurt." "I'm not hurt," he said. "I'm concerned." She gave a small, tired smile. "Concern is more than I expected." She then shared something she had not planned to say. She spoke about moments of kindness that had kept her going. A teacher who once encouraged her to think differently, a friend who had left and never returned, a memory of feeling free, even if only briefly. "These moments showed me another way to live," she said. "Once you see that, you can't unsee it." The rancher felt something shift inside him. He had always believed that freedom came from solitude, but listening to her, he realized freedom also required courage, the courage to leave, to speak, to risk being misunderstood. "You don't know me," he said. "I might not be the person you think." "I don't need you to be anything," she replied. "I just need you not to turn me away tonight." The words landed heavily. Turning her away would be easy, safer. He could close the door, return to his routines, and forget this conversation ever happened. But he knew he wouldn't forget. Some moments changed a person whether they accepted responsibility or not. "You can stay the night," he said finally. "We'll talk more in the morning." Relief crossed her face, brief but genuine. "Thank you," she said softly. He showed her a small room with a clean bed and a blanket. It was simple, but it was shelter. Before leaving her there, he paused. "This doesn't mean I agree with everything," he said. "I don't need agreement," she replied. "Just honesty." He nodded and left her to rest. That night, sleep did not come easily for either of them. The rancher lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words in his mind. He thought about choice, responsibility, and the lines people drew between cultures without understanding the individuals living inside them. In the other room, the woman stared at the wall. listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. For the first time in a long while, she felt a small sense of safety, not because her problems were solved, but because someone had listened without judgment. As the night passed, both understood that this was no longer just her story. It was becoming his too. And when the sun rose, it would bring questions neither of them could avoid. Morning arrived quietly. Pale light slipped through the window, touching the wooden walls and the worn floor. The rancher woke before the sun fully rose, as he always did. Habit pulled him from sleep, but this morning felt different. The house was no longer empty. Another presence rested inside it, and that simple fact made the familiar space feel unsettled. He stepped outside to breathe in the cool air. The land looked the same as always, wide, calm, patient. Animals stirred in the distance. Normally, this view grounded him. Today, his thoughts were restless. The woman's words from the night before stayed with him. Fear, choice, being erased. He had heard many stories in his life, but few had followed him into mourning like this one. After finishing his usual chores, he returned to the house. The woman was already awake. She sat at the small table, her hands folded, her posture careful, as if she did not want to take up too much space. She looked tired, but there was also a quiet alertness in her eyes, like someone prepared for difficult conversations. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," she answered honestly. "Enough." He poured coffee for himself and set hot water in front of her. She accepted it with a nod. For a few moments they sat in silence, listening to the house settle and the day begin. "I've been thinking," the rancher said at last. "About what happens next." She looked up, waiting. "This place," he continued, "is not invisible. People notice when things change. A stranger staying here will raise questions." "I know," she said. "I don't plan to hide forever." He studied her carefully. "Then what is your plan?" She hesitated. "I don't have every step figured out. I just knew I had to leave. Sometimes survival comes before planning." He nodded slowly. He understood that more than he expected. She explained that she was caught between two worlds now. She no longer fully belonged where she came from, but she had not yet found a place where she could stand freely. Every option carried risk. Staying meant losing herself. Leaving meant facing judgment, uncertainty, and isolation. "I didn't come here to be saved," she said. "I came here to breathe." The rancher leaned back in his chair. "Breathing space often comes with responsibility," he replied, "for both people involved." "I understand," she said quietly. They talked for a long time that morning, about practical things. About distance, time, and the reality of living outside any community. He told her about his own life, about choosing solitude after loss, about building routines to keep memories from swallowing him whole. He did not speak much about pain, but enough for her to understand that his quiet life was not empty by accident. "You chose to be alone," she said. "Yes," he replied, "but choosing loneliness is different from being forced into silence." She absorbed that carefully. "That's exactly the difference I'm trying to explain." As the sun climbed higher, tension crept back into the conversation. Reality pressed in. "If people from your community come looking for you," he said, "I can't lie." "I wouldn't ask you to," she replied. "I won't put that burden on you. But I also won't hand you over like property," he added. She looked at him sharply, then lowered her gaze. "Thank you." That single sentence carried more meaning than either of them expected. Later that day, they worked side by side on the ranch. He showed her simple tasks, feeding animals, carrying supplies, cleaning tools. He did not assign her work. She offered. Movement helped her think. Physical effort quieted her racing thoughts. As they worked, conversation came more easily. They spoke about small things, weather, animals, places she had seen as a child. These lighter moments created balance, reminding both of them that life was more than fear and conflict. Still, tension lingered beneath the surface. In the afternoon, a vehicle passed slowly on the distant road. The sound of its engine made both of them pause. The rancher felt his shoulders tighten. The woman froze, her hand gripping the fence. "It's nothing," he said after watching it disappear. She nodded, but her body remained tense. "This is what I mean," she said softly, "always waiting, always listening for footsteps." He realized then how exhausting her life must have been. Constant alertness wore a person down. "You can't live like that forever," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm trying to change it." As evening approached, the rancher faced a decision he had been avoiding. Helping her temporarily was one thing. Becoming part of her struggle was another. By allowing her to stay, he was already crossing lines he had kept firm for years. "You should know something," he said as they sat on the porch watching the sun lower. "I don't believe I can fix your situation." She looked at him calmly. "I don't need fixing. But staying here will connect us," he continued. "People may assume things, they may judge, you may face pressure. So might I accept that," she said. "I've already been judged. Silence won't protect me anymore." He respected that honesty. Too many people hoped for safety without consequence. That night, he lay awake again, but this time his thoughts were clearer. He understood that neutrality was an illusion. By listening, by allowing space, he had already chosen a side, not against a people or culture, but for an individual's right to be heard. In the other room, the woman also struggled to sleep. She replayed conversations, weighed risks, and questioned her own courage. But beneath the fear, there was something new: resolve. She was no longer running blindly. She was standing, even if the ground beneath her was unstable. The next morning, they agreed on one thing: honesty would guide whatever came next. No promises beyond what could be given. No silence where truth was required. Neither of them knew how long she would stay. Neither knew how the outside world would respond. But both understood that this crossing of paths was not accidental. Two people from different lives, standing between choices and consequences, learning that real strength often begins in the space between fear and action. The tension that had been quietly growing finally stepped into the open a few days later. It did not arrive loudly or suddenly. It came the way trouble often does, slow, watchful, and unavoidable. The rancher noticed it first in small signs. A vehicle passed the road more than once in the same day. A stranger stopped at the nearby gas station and asked questions that sounded casual but were not. The land was still calm, but the air felt different, like the moment before a storm. The woman noticed it too. She became more careful with her movements, more alert to sounds. She no longer stood freely in the open fields. At night, she slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar noise. "They're looking," she said one evening, her voice steady but quiet. The rancher did not deny it. "Yes," he replied, "I think they are." Neither of them panicked. Fear had already shaped too much of her life, and he refused to let it control his. But they both understood that the time of quiet thinking was ending. Decisions would soon be forced, whether they were ready or not. The next morning, two visitors arrived. They did not come in anger. That made it harder. They were calm, respectful, and firm. Two men who spoke with the authority of people used to being listened to. They introduced themselves politely and explained they were concerned about a missing woman. The rancher stood on his porch, hands relaxed at his sides. He did not invite them in. He also did not chase them away. "I live alone," he said evenly. "No one is missing here." The men exchanged a glance. They did not accuse him of lying. They simply waited. "We only want to talk to her," one of them said. "She belongs with her people." The words landed heavily. The rancher felt something rise inside him, not anger but a sharp sense of clarity. "No one belongs to anyone," he replied. "If she's here, it's by choice." That was the moment things shifted. The woman stepped forward then, standing beside him. She did not hide. Her voice did not shake. "I'm not missing," she said. "I left." The men looked at her with a mix of concern and frustration. "You don't understand what you're doing," one said. "I understand exactly what I'm doing," she answered. "I'm choosing." The conversation grew tense but never explosive. Words were chosen carefully. Each sentence carried weight. The men warned of consequences, of isolation, regret, and loss of support. They spoke as if they were protecting her, and in their own way they believed they were. She listened. Then she spoke again. "Protection that doesn't allow choice is not protection," she said. "It's control." Silence followed. The rancher watched her with quiet respect. This was not desperation speaking. This was resolve. Eventually, the men left, promising that the matter was not finished. Their vehicle disappeared down the road, leaving behind dust and certainty. The rancher knew what would come next. Pressure, judgment, people would talk, stories would twist. His name would be tied to hers in ways he could not control. That night, the weight of it all settled in. "You didn't sign up for this," she said, standing near the doorway. "I can leave." He looked at her carefully. "You already offered that once," he said. "I didn't accept then." "But it's worse now," she replied. "They'll keep coming." "Yes," he said, "they probably will." She waited for him to say more, to tell her what to do. He didn't. "I won't force you to stay," he continued, "but I won't force you to go either." Tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from relief. "I don't want to hide," she said. "I want to face this standing up." The next days were the hardest yet. Messages arrived through indirect channels, warnings wrapped in concern, advice mixed with judgment. Some people painted the rancher as a manipulator. Others painted her as confused or reckless. None of them truly listened. The rancher felt the sting of being misunderstood. He had lived quietly for years, avoiding attention. Now his life was being discussed by people who had never spoken to him before, but he refused to defend himself with anger. He stood firm in the truth he knew. "She's here because she chose to be," he said whenever asked. That's all. The woman faced her own storm. She heard words meant to pull her back through guilt and fear. She mourned what she was losing, not people, but the idea of belonging without conditions. One afternoon, she sat alone on the porch, staring at the horizon. "I didn't think choosing myself would hurt this much," she admitted when the rancher joined her. "Choosing yourself often does," he said, "especially when others benefit from you staying small." She nodded slowly. As pressure increased, so did her clarity. She began making plans not to disappear but to move forward. Education, legal advice, support beyond fear-based loyalty. She wanted a future that was built, not borrowed. The rancher supported her in quiet ways, driving her when needed, standing beside her when conversations grew heavy, never speaking for her unless asked. One evening, another confrontation came, not with strangers but with someone she once trusted. The words were emotional, painful, and filled with disappointment. "You've changed," the person said. "Yes," she replied, "that's the point." After that night, something settled. The loudest voices had spoken, the threats had been made, the worst judgments had already fallen. What remained was choice. She stood in the open field the next morning, sunlight warming her face. She placed a hand over her stomach, breathing slowly. "I won't raise a child in fear," she said quietly. "No matter where I go next." The rancher nodded. "Then you already know what to do." This chapter of her life was ending, not with defeat but with courage earned the hard way. And his life, once defined by distance, had been reshaped by standing still when it mattered. They did not know exactly what the future would bring, but they knew one thing with certainty. Neither of them would walk away from this moment unchanged. The final weeks at the ranch passed quietly, but they were filled with meaning. The tension that once hung heavy in the air slowly loosened its grip. There were no more sudden visits, no more messages carried by uneasy voices. It was as if the storm had spent itself, leaving behind a clear but unfamiliar sky. The woman spent her mornings walking the land, breathing deeply, letting the calm settle into her body. She no longer moved with fear. There was caution, yes, but it was steady now, not sharp. Each step felt chosen, not forced. She had begun writing plans in a small notebook, simple notes about the future, about learning, about building a life where her child would grow up knowing choice instead of fear. The rancher watched these changes quietly. He had never thought of himself as someone who influenced lives. He believed people arrived at decisions on their own, but he could see now that space, safety, and respect had power. Sometimes, all a person needed was room to hear their own thoughts. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the fields gold, the woman sat across from him at the table. "I've made a decision," she said. He nodded. "I figured you would," she smiled slightly. "I'm going to leave soon, not running, moving forward." He felt a mix of relief and weight in his chest. "Where will you go?" "I have options now," she replied. "That's what matters." They talked late into the night, about practical details, about risks, about hopes that felt fragile but real. There was no sadness in the conversation, only the quiet understanding that this chapter was ending as it should. "You gave me something important," she said at last. "I didn't do much," he replied. "You did," she said firmly. "You didn't decide for me." That stayed with him. On the morning she left, the sky was clear. The rancher helped load her small bag into the truck. There were no long speeches, no promises that couldn't be kept. She turned to face him. "Whatever happens next," she said, "I'll remember this place as the moment my life changed." He nodded. "So will I." They shook hands, then paused. Without thinking too much, he gave her a brief, respectful embrace. It was not emotional, but it was honest. The truck drove away, leaving behind a trail of dust that slowly settled back into the land. The ranch felt quiet again, but not empty. In the months that followed, the rancher returned to his routines. The animals still needed care. The land still demanded work. But something inside him had shifted. He no longer saw isolation as protection. He saw it as a choice, one he could change if needed. Occasionally a letter arrived, short updates. Good news, challenges faced and handled, progress made step by step. The woman never asked for help, she didn't need it anymore. She had found her voice and it carried her forward. As time passed, the rancher found himself speaking more when he went into town, listening more carefully, standing firmer when he saw quiet injustice. He did not become loud or confrontational. He simply stopped looking away. One evening, long after the season changed, he stood on the porch watching the sunset. He thought about how one knock at the door had altered the direction of 2 lives, not through control or force, but through listening and respect. Far away, the woman stood in a new place, preparing for a future built on choice. She knew challenges would come. Life was never simple, but she also knew she was no longer afraid of her own decisions. She placed a hand over her stomach and smiled gently. "This life will begin with courage," she whispered. And in that quiet truth, the story found its ending, not in conflict or noise, but in strength earned, dignity preserved, and 2 lives forever changed by one moment of human understanding.